that all looks good and everybody can see that there. All right, wonderful. So I'm going to start by introducing myself. My name is David Smith. I'm the Associate Director of Program Operations for the Fostering Innovation Branch of Investment New South Wales, which is the New South Wales Government's investment arm for entrepreneurial activity. Now that's a big long title, so maybe I should just give you some insight into my background. I am very different from most people that work from the New South Wales Government because I come from the industry. I am a 3-time startup founder myself. I had one startup that raised a lot of venture capital but never really went anywhere. I had another startup that exited successfully, and my third startup really didn't go anywhere. I've also worked on the other side, so I have worked in industry as somebody who supports startups. So one of my major roles was running what was called WeWork Labs in Australia. WeWork Labs was essentially WeWork, the global co-working operation, wanted to do more programs to encourage investment and job creation in the startups that were members. So I was in charge of that. I was there until, unfortunately, they had a rather big public failure, but I did get to see that from the inside, so it was very insightful. And then before this role with Investment New South Wales, I was actually working for the University of Sydney. I was their head of startup programs for what they call the Incubate program. Now, I believe the speaker before me, who I heard very briefly, was talking about how important universities are to innovation and entrepreneurship. I cannot reiterate this enough. I think they are vital for the ecosystem moving forward. In my presentation today, I'm going to keep it relatively brief. I want to introduce the work that we're doing at TechCentral, which is now Australia's largest innovation precinct. I want to explain the thinking behind why we've invested so much into this. And then what I would like to do is I would actually like to share with you some of the insights we've got from the transition from our existing Sydney Startup Hub to this TechCentral Innovation Precinct. Now, my day job specifically is handling that transition. So I have seen all of the data, I've spoken to all of the people. I'm very across what is happening there. So let's start with TechCentral. TechCentral is one of the biggest things to happen to Australia's innovation entrepreneurship ecosystem. So TechCentral is basically 6 different neighborhoods that have all gotten together to combine to create the future of the New South Wales economy. It's an ecosystem of startups, scale-ups, universities, global tech giants, and probably the most important thing for entrepreneurial systems, venture capital. Now, the picture that you are seeing here on the slide, this is the Atlassian Tower. For those of you that are not familiar with the Australian startup Atlassian, it is Australia's most successful tech story, although I think it may be overtaken soon by Canva. Atlassian was launched in the Australian market before going worldwide. If you have ever shipped a software product, you have probably used an Atlassian product. So Atlassian are at the center of this TechCentral Innovation Precinct. What they are trying to do is they are trying to generate the next generation of startups using their previous experience. Now, I mentioned that TechCentral was a combination of various different suburbs, precincts, ecosystem. What we've done with the TechCentral Innovation Precinct is we have tried to have one voice representing all of these different entities. Now, for those of you that are going through the process at the moment, you will understand that is not as easy as it sounds because we have a lot of different opinions, we have a lot of different intentions, but the one thing everybody can agree on is a process called agglomeration. Now, what agglomeration essentially is if we can combine everything together, we can create something that is better than the sum of its parts. And what that means is if we combine all of these different entities, put them all together, we can increase the opportunity for cooperation amongst big business, universities, startups, scale-ups, venture capitalists. We can create serendipity. Now, for those of you that are not familiar with the word serendipity, it's an English word that basically means those lovely mistakes, those lovely things where you just bump into somebody on the street, you start talking, and it changes your life. That is serendipity. Now, what something like a TechCentral Innovation Hub wants to do is it wants to combine so many different opportunities in the one area that we can create these moments of serendipity. Just some stats around us. The TechCentral Innovation Precinct is worth about $42 billion to the Australian economy. It employs over 100,000 people in 4,300 businesses. It is home to some of Australia's tech giants and unicorns. Atlassian and Canva I've already mentioned, but there is another big Australian success story called Afterpay, which was recently purchased by Block in excess of about $27 billion. We also have Safety Culture, which is an Australian unicorn, and Rocked. Now, when you talk about unicorns in these sort of precincts or these global areas, the things that you want are not necessarily what that unicorn can bring, but it's what their next generation of staff bring. For example, if you look at the PayPal mafia, all the different startups that they formed spinning out of the PayPal exit really created the early 2000 post-dot-com burst boom. This is what we want to create. We want to create an environment where all of these people that have learnt best practice become into a position where they can be supported and create new entities, and they can hire, they can create jobs, they can create value, they can raise venture capital. Now, in the area of TechCentral, this is not one of the stats here, but I think it's important. There are over 150,000 STEM students. Now, for those of you that are not familiar with the acronym STEM, that means science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. We want to give these young startups access to some of the brightest young talent. We've mentioned before proximity, proximity, proximity. Now, we have created little hubs within the broader hub to really focus on areas that the government really wants to encourage investment. So, for example, cybersecurity, we have multiple different parties within walking distance of one another. AI, which I'm sure AI has been a hot topic for every startup event in the last 2 years, and I don't imagine it will change now. Quantum computing, Australia is at the forefront of quantum computing. Australia does see it in its very large national interest to be at the forefront of this. And the creative industries, Australia and Sydney in particular, punches well above their weight in things like movie studios, TV shows, video game production. Now, I won't mention too much about this, but it's basically what we're doing is it's centered around Australia's busiest transport hub. It is home to most of our top talent, researchers, and innovation. Now, I mentioned that I was the head of startup programs for the University of Sydney, which is this picture. They're a top 25 global university. They are Australia's sandstone university, similar to our Harvard, for example. Now, we also have the University of Technology Sydney, which is very embedded in the TechCentral project, as well as research institutes, some to mention are the Sydney Quantum Academy, the Sydney Nanoscience Hub, and global incubators and accelerators such as Techstars. Now, we host a lot of events, but I realize that time is of the essence, so I don't want to spend too much time, but we have multiple global events that take place at TechCentral. We believe that this is a pull factor. So what that creates is that creates people wanting to be a part of the ecosystem and contribute to it. Some examples are StartMate Demo Day, which is it's our Y Combinator. Vivid Sydney, which is a wonderful event, and probably the one that most people in this room should know, which is South by Southwest. South by Southwest is the most prominent innovation event in the world, and Sydney was the first city to have one outside of Austin, Texas. Now let me tell you about the lessons that we have learned from already running one hub that we are transitioning into another one. We will start with the Sydney Startup Hub. Now this was created in February 2018. It created over 17,000 square foot of affordable space in the CBD, and it provided accommodation for up to 500 startups. Sorry, I'm going to go back. It was ahead of its time. It understood that proximity was the number one thing that startups were looking for. They needed to be closer to one another. Now, to augment that, we created a couple of government initiatives that would help move this forward. The first one was our level 1 community space. So we actually offered free co-working on level 1 of this 11-story building. Now, the other 10 floors were occupied by co-working or accelerator spaces, but we gave a free space on level 1. Now, that included meeting rooms, event spaces, and open workspaces. Now, a good friend of mine actually raised 48 million Australian dollars, which is the equivalent to about 25 million US dollars from this community space. They did not need to spend a cent on office space till they had raised all that money. And that's what we were trying to do. We were trying to create as many free opportunities as possible. Obviously with not even the agreement, but I think the culture was, okay, if you do raise money, go upstairs and pay for an office there. Now, the other thing that we did was a regional landing pad. Now, regional landing pad is very, very important for a state like New South Wales. The reason is the state of New South Wales, despite sounding small, is about 2.5 times larger than Vietnam. So in our state alone, we have 2.5 Vietnams. And most of Australia is most of New South Wales is concentrated on the one city, Sydney. Now, what that means is all of the money, all of the talent is all centered here. However, we have a vast geographic space, so we created the regional landing pad for anybody that wasn't from the Sydney district, where they could come in, access the money, access the talent, access all of the infrastructure available to startups for free. All they had to do was register with the government as a regional business. Now, our other point of interest, and this will be very important for those of you in the room, was our international landing pad. So the international landing pad was originally a room that allowed overseas companies to have 3 free desks for a period of 4 months to any tech businesses that were looking to embed themselves in the Sydney startup community. Now, for those of you listening, I really want to share a learning with you. For those of you that are thinking of doing something like this, do not do it the way that we originally did it. The way that we originally did it was we set up a very, very nice room away from the action. For those of you that would be coming from Vietnam to go get yourself ingrained in the Sydney startup community, you don't want to be away from the action. You want to be right in the middle of it. Our new landing pad that we're doing in TechCentral is actually a very pared back version. It is simply a desk or 3 for up to 4 months in the middle of everybody else. And what that means for us is it actually allows you to have more time to actually meet the people involved. We have had so much more uptake from overseas companies because they want to be in the middle of the action. They don't want to be a room in the side. So for those of you who may be looking at setting up something similar to this, take my contact details from our team on the ground there. Get in touch with me. I will talk you through all of the learnings, because we as a community are so much better when we have people from all over the world, but I've had 2 parties from Vietnam already sharing their knowledge with us and integrating into the community. By integrating into the community, you quickly become mentors and access points for our startups, and that's what we're trying to achieve. We're trying to upskill the people that we work with all the time, and that's what these international landing pads allow. They allow our local ecosystem to grow. Now, the Sydney Startup Hub, we had over $1 billion raised of venture capital. We had over 2,000 startups that were incubated at the Sydney Startup Hub. And I mentioned earlier that I was a 3-time founder. 2 of my startups went out of the Sydney Startup Hub because I genuinely loved the sense of community. We had over 1,400 events with over 58,000 attendees. And on our ground floor, the free co-working space, we had just under 160,000 registered visitors up to September 2024. Our regional landing pad provided support for over 1,400 regional startups. Now, I will leave that there because I think I've given you a lot of information. What I will say is, for those of you that are looking to set up pieces like this, what we probably didn't do right with Sydney Startup Hub was go where the market is. We tried to dictate where the market should go. So we picked a part of Sydney that was convenient to us. Meanwhile, everything was happening on the other side of Sydney, down in TechCentral. We corrected that mistake. We took the opportunity to take all of the good that we had built up in the Sydney Startup Hub and relocate it to TechCentral. That is the role I'm currently doing. So if there is anybody watching this speech right now that is going through the same process, again, please get my contact details from somebody there and reach out, because it is very important that I share what we've learned so far, because I genuinely believe that we all work together to create value in the investment, in the entrepreneurial